The study remembered my father better than I did. His pipe ash tang still lived in the rugs. Pencil grooves tattooed the oak desk where he'd pressed too hard. A T-ring ghosted the blotter like a moon's slow fading. The house creaked the way it had learned to, after decades of his footsteps. It was late afternoon, the hour when shadows soften and begin to practice being night. The drawer, his drawer, sat flush beneath the desk's surface, a narrow slab of wood with a keyhole like an unblinking eye. It was the only thing in the room that felt awake. I could feel it paying attention. He'd made me promise. I had been 7, and 7 is the age when promises are spells and parents are gods. Never open this drawer, Eli. Not if I ask you to. Not if you're angry. Not if you're certain you're right. Promise me. I had promised, breath fogging his wrist bone as he tied my shoelace into a rabbit's ear. It was a gentle moment. It lodged like glass anyway. He was dead now, and I was 27, and the promise felt like a shirt I'd outgrown. The key waited in my pocket, small, warm from my thigh. I didn't find it. It found me, dropped like an afterthought into the velvet nest of his watch case after the funeral. Winking brass among cufflinks and a paperclip bent into a fish. I held the key over the keyhole. The house took a breath. The desk's surface reflected a slice of me, mouth clenched, eyes too bright, my father's hairline rehearsing itself in my scalp. "I'm not breaking it," I told the room. "I'm ending it." The key slid in like recognition. When I turned it, the lock gave a sound I had never heard in 30 years in this house. A small, satisfied exhale, as if a voice I couldn't hear had said, "Finally." The drawer loosened. Wood on wood, a patient little scrape. I pulled. An inch, then 2. Something inside bumped against the front from the other side, soft like a cloth-wrapped book nudging a door. The smell wasn't rot or metal. It was the smell of paper that's known hands. Dust woke, glimmering. "Dad," I said to an empty room like a bad joke. "What did you lock away?" "What did you lock in?" The drawer slid all the way open. Inside, laid with the reverence of an altar, was a slim black notebook, a wooden box sealed with twine, and a single envelope addressed to me in my father's spare, disciplined hand. The handwriting looked like a fence, only some things could pass through. I took the envelope first. "Eli," I read aloud to prove I could. "If you have opened this, I failed twice." The room leaned closer. I read. My father didn't believe in fear as a teacher. He believed in facts, in neat stacks of paper, in maintenance. Feelings were drafts he never turned in. He loved me, I suppose, like a person who mistrusts the weather loves a roof. It was raining the day he warned me about the drawer. I remember because the sound of rain on the bay window made everything seem both nearer and farther away. "Never open it," he said. He knelt so we were eye to eye, which made me suspicious. Eye contact was currency he spent cautiously. You have the sort of mind that keeps going once it starts. I don't want to give it something to chew that will chew back. I laughed. He didn't. "What's in it?" I asked. "Not what." "Who?" he said and smiled in a way I did not see again for years. A slip, a flinch. He caught himself. "Old work. Bad work. The kind that stains a man's hands." It took me a long time to understand that the first lie in a family is often told to protect a second one. "What if you forget?" I said. "What if you die and I have to clean?" "I won't forget," he said. "And if I die, you call Mr. Salazar next door and ask him to take the desk away. He knows." Mr. Salazar was the retired locksmith who lived 2 doors down with a terrier that hated sweaters. He fixed sad things for fun, loose latches, bent mail slots, doorbells that rang like coughs. My father trusted him because his hands didn't shake. "You ask too much of a 7-year-old, my mother said from the doorway. A little late, already elsewhere. She measured days and obligations, not hours. Later, she would measure them in empty minutes and wine. "I ask what I have," my father said simply, "and I have Eli." I should have felt chosen. I felt captured. I promised. He kissed the crown of my head as if the promise were a hat that might blow off. After that, the drawer's presence fattened. It lived at the edge of my attention like a cliff. I learned to set my cereal bowl at the other end of the desk when I did homework. I learned to keep my knee away from it while I read, as if it could bruise through denim. Some nights I dreamed I opened it and found a clock with no hands ticking anyway. Other nights I dreamed it opened itself. When my mother left, a sabbatical, the note said, as if you could temporarily stop loving a person the way you stop teaching a class, the drawer's hum got louder. I pressed my ear to the desk once. I thought I heard paper turning without fingers. I learned to avoid the study when my father wasn't inside it, as if the room, unsupervised, might misbehave. I learned to water the plant. It died anyway. Some promises have teeth. They don't bite until you feed them. We buried my mother when the city mailed back her wedding band and a set of keys with no house. The coroner's letter was a paragraph of apology, printed 5 times in different words. The accident had been clean, the end immediate. She had been walking on a Florida shoulder where the map forgot to include sidewalks. A driver sneezed his car into her. We buried my father twice. The first burial was clerical, the tidy service with good chairs and bad cookies. I chose the music because the funeral home handed me a list of approved songs, and my father would have hated being approved. I picked nothing. We let the silence do the work. Silence did too much work in our family. The second burial was the day after in the study, alone, the envelope in my hands, his voice in those neat strokes. But I'm moving too fast. The envelope waited years for me. At the first funeral, Mr. Salazar came and stood like a coat rack, patient, sturdy, containing other people's belongings. When he hugged me, he smelled like cedar and coffee. "I'm sorry, kid," he said. He was a precise man. I admired that. "He was lonely," I said, before I knew I would say it. Mr. Salazar nodded as if I'd presented proof of gravity. Precision is a kind of loneliness. After the funeral, I found a paper in my father's desk drawer above the locked one. A will that was more instruction manual than love letter. The house was mine. The study was to remain intact until such a time as you are older than I was when I first locked the drawer. Older than I was when I first locked the drawer. It took me 3 days to realize what that meant. He had been 33 when my mother left, 35 when the sabbatical became a climate, my climate, 40 when he started turning phrases into boxes. He was 64 now. Older than I was when I first locked the drawer meant, wait until you are no longer a son in your bones. I was 27 and already older than I should have been. Grief ages certain parts of you and leaves other parts child soft. I waited 3 months, long enough to process the estate, return casseroles in the correct casserole etiquette, and stop waking to check if he was breathing. Long enough to start using the good plates. Not long enough to feel clean. Then I found the key. Then I opened the drawer. Then I read the letter that began. If you have opened this, I failed twice. The letter was 3 pages. No salutations after the first, no flourish at the end. That was his way. He did not believe in emotional punctuation. Eli, if you have opened this, I failed twice. First at the thing inside the drawer, and second at raising a son who could out-stubborn me. I did not want you to meet the drawer as a child. I do not want you to meet it as a man. I wanted you never to meet it at all. Inside, you will find a box and a book. The box contains the lock I should have put on myself. The book contains my handwriting when it wandered off the assignment. You know that your grandfather was not kind. I did not tell you that he was worse than unkind. He was curious. He was a collector of explanations. Some men are so offended by mystery that they hurt people to remove it. I learned that removing mystery makes new mystery with teeth. He kept notebooks. He wrote down experiments he called corrections. The first correction was my mother's schedule. The last was mine. This is not drama. This is record. I burned most of his notebooks the night before your mother and I married. I kept one because burning it felt like erasing evidence of a crime I wanted to remember how to never commit. I locked that notebook in this drawer the week your mother left because I felt the old appetite wake up in me like a fever. I told myself I was protecting you from a man I recognized. There is something wrong in this family that looks like diligence. We call it preparedness. It is control. It is fear rearranged into lists. It eats joy. If you are reading this, I think I did not starve it enough. I am sorry. I love you in the only honest way I know how. I will not pretend I didn't fail. Do not read the notebook alone. Do not open the box unless you have already decided to throw it away. If you throw it away, throw it far enough that it cannot find its way home through habit. Promise me one more thing, though you have every right not to, that you will not let the drawer teach you who you are. You are not an experimenter. You are a person with a life outside this desk. Leave the study sometimes. Dad. I laughed and cried at the same time, and the sound it made felt like coughing out water. This is a bad scavenger hunt, I told the desk. You left me the map and the warning that the map kills the walker. The box was cedar, varnish dulled by thumb oil, twine looped in a neat square knot. Under the twine, an old brass latch. My father never met a closure he didn't fortify. The notebook was black, cloth-bound, simple. No title on the spine, no elastic to keep it shut. It had the unwavering humility of a tool. When I opened it, it cracked a little. Paper that's been compressed learns a posture. There were two handwritings inside. The first on the early pages was not my father's. It was a neat, slanted cursive that imposed itself on the paper without hurry. The second, bleeding into the margins, interrupting, arguing, was my father's. Block letters, narrow and efficient. A dialogue between two men who would not have done well at dinner together. Top of the first page in the older hand, correction log, household implementation series. A record of efficiencies applied to remove emotional waste and increase moral cleanliness. My skin did a thing I had no word for. It moved away from my bones. I read, Grandfather had been an accountant. He had believed in numbers the way some people believe in confession, as a way to come clean. His notebook did not describe numbers. It described people like numbers that had been misbehaving. Entry 1, subject, M's failure, dissociation, vagueness disguised as kindness. Correction, schedule implemented hour by hour. Household bells set to signal transitions. Cook, eat, rest, read scripture. Journal prompts assigned to replace floating. Outcome, improved clarity. Reduced error rate in meal planning and laundering. Reduced crying episodes. The language was gentle and operational. It made a person into a hallway where you could hang tasks like pictures. Entry 5. Subject, T, self. Failure. Lack of boundary. Over-identification with contingencies. Inability to enforce systems against open resistance. Correction. Physical discipline. Cold showers. Belt when late. Actively withhold tenderness to reduce its marketplace value. Outcome. Improved punctuality. Reduced tendency to explain. Increased capacity to enact. Actively withhold tenderness read like a recipe for famine. My father's block letters entered the margin beside this entry. I remember the bells. I remember how the hour made a sound like permission. He underlined withhold tenderness 3 times and drew a box around it as if quarantining an illness. The entries marched forward through the house: servant, old dog, tenant, son. Each experiment had the same structure. Identify a person, define their failure in words that sounded like kindness, implement an efficiency that resembled punishment, record the improvement as if improvement were a word that could be stapled to a bruise. Then the entries stopped numbering subjects and started naming them. Subject, Daniel. Failure, dreaming, latency, unused potential, persists in drawing during arithmetic drills. Correction, remove objects of distraction. Lock drawer. Replace affection with praise for compliance. Train hunger on small, predictable rewards. Outcome, accepted correction with appropriate quietness. Increased speed on long division. Reduced eyes elsewhere. Daniel, my father's brother. I had never met him. I had asked once as a kid why there were no photographs of anyone on my father's side of the family, except a stern woman whose haircut frightened me. History is heavy, my father had said. Sometimes it's safer in the ground. In the margin beside Daniel's entry, my father had written, he called me from the bus depot when I was 12. He'd shaved his head with a safety razor and left me a map I couldn't follow. Under that, in smaller letters, a later hand, shakier. I kept the map in my wallet for 20 years. The later entries grew peculiar. Less about the household, more about the mind. Construct, the drawer. Failure, emotional leakage. Subjects maintain internal drawers of grievance, secret softness. Leakage manifests as imprecision, lateness, romanticism, disobedience. Correction, externalize drawer. Build physical analog. Lock. Practice refusal. Teach subject to be owner of lock rather than servant of leakage. Outcome to be determined. In my father's block letters, a sentence I would later copy out and fold in my pocket, the way he had folded his brother's map. You cannot construct a metaphor without making it a room where someone will go and live. I closed the notebook. My hands looked less like mine. The box weighted, twined steady. I almost put everything back. I almost called Mr. Salazar. I almost honored the tired man who had written, "Do not read the notebook alone." Instead, I did what my family did when faced with a choice that might let them be forgiven. I trusted myself to be the first one to do it right. I opened the box. Inside the cedar was another lock. Of course there was. Beneath it, wrapped in a piece of my father's old flannel, a small brass plate etched with a word, protocol. I lifted the plate and found a sheaf of index cards bound with a rubber band that had melted into them over time, a little seam of amber. I worried it loose. The top card had my father's hand, all caps. Protocol for when the drawer wants to be opened. The word once stuck. I read the cards. There were 8, each an instruction. Together they made an algorithm. Alone they read like superstition. 1. Make tea. Do it the same way every time. Hold the cup while you decide. Warm hands make different decisions than cold ones. 2. Say the names of the living. If you can't list 3, you're not allowed to open anything. 3. Touch wood that isn't the desk. Remind yourself that not all wood is a door. 4. Ask the drawer a question it cannot answer. If it answers, leave the room. 5. If you cry, finish crying. If you cannot, do not begin. 6. Open the window. If it is winter, open it anyway. Let the air have a say. 7. If you decide to open, narrate. Say out loud exactly what you're doing. I am opening the drawer. I am lifting the book. Let language be a chaperone. 8. When you are done, lock, return, key to pocket, leave. Do not sit back down. These were not the instructions of a scientist. These were the instructions of a person who had built a cage and over time realized he was making meals for whatever lived inside it. I made tea. I said the names of the living. Maya, my once girlfriend, now careful friend. Mr. Salazar, neighbor anchor. Myself, a name counts. I touched the window frame. I asked the drawer a question it couldn't answer. What was the first joke I told you? It said nothing. Good. Then I did not cry. Then I narrated. I am reading the notebook, I said to the rug, which did not argue. I slid the notebook to the second half, to where my father's entries had outnumbered his father's. Day 14 of not reading it. The drawer's no louder than it was yesterday. That must be what improvement feels like. Not worse. Day 33. I dreamt I put Eli in the drawer to keep him safe from the people who open drawers. I woke with the key in my fist. Day 80. I found myself correcting my correction, trying to install smaller drawers in my mind to set the big drawer inside. Infinite regress of furniture. Closet within closet until no one can find the house. Day 81. I am tired. Day 190. I do not know where to put my tenderness when it arrives without calling first. I do not know how to receive it without measuring it. Day 365 anniversary. If I keep this lock long enough, will I mistake fear for virtue? He had been writing for years. Somewhere around year 5, the tidy daily entries fell apart into sentences that refused to be columns. He was no longer trying to fix something. He was documenting a negotiation with a thing he understood would outlive him. On one of the last pages, he'd sketched the desk. The proportions were wrong. The drawer too big, the room too small. Under the sketch, trap/altar/mailbox. I turned to the back expecting blank paper. There, tucked into the flap of the binding, was a photograph. My father at 20, cheekbones uncommitted, hair recklessly alive, tie too tight, standing beside a man I had never seen. The other man was shorter, his eyes bright and reckless. He had a map folded in his shirt pocket like a flag he hadn't decided to fly. My father's arm was not around him, exactly. It hovered a careful inch away, the way a person stands near a stove, heat without contact. On the back of the photograph, in my father's later hand, Daniel before he turned into a direction. Then in something so faint I had to tilt it toward the window. He was kind. That is not a waste. I pressed my thumb to the words and left a small crescent of sweat. I had the sort of mind that keeps going once it starts. The notebook fed me. The box promised me I could starve myself later. I carried them both to the armchair by the window and read until the light failed and the room reconfigured itself into a less honest shape. I did not leave when I was done. I sat back down. You can tell when a house is protecting something. The doors start to resist. The lights flicker in the room you need them most. Mechanical failure becomes a language. The study door, which had always swung freely, developed a reluctance. I had to put my shoulder into it. The lamp on the desk went stubborn. Blubs gave up before they blew. I told myself it was the wiring. Wiring does not account for how the lock on the drawer felt warmer every day, like a coin thumbed too often. I started sleeping with the notebook on the nightstand, the way people sleep with water after a fever. I would wake at 3, always 3, and go sit in the study because it felt less dangerous to be near the noise than to lie in bed listening to it. I pretended the noise was pipes. I pretended pipes could say my name. In the morning I would make eggs and burn them because my father had made eggs and never burned them, and love can look like ruining what someone did well in order to own it. I called Maya once. I told her about the drawer the way you tell someone about a movie you pretend wasn't scary because you don't want to admit you're still carrying a scene in your pocket. It's a piece of furniture, she said gently. She does not like superstition. It reminds her of the summer her mother decided Mercury retrograde explained her father's affair. Put it on the curb. Let students put a TV on it and stain it with beer. Civilization. It's not the desk, I said. It's the thing that happens to me near it. Then leave the house for a week, she said. Let the thing happen in a hotel. Report back when it cannot. I can't leave, I said. It feels like leaving a stove on. Your father built a stove into a drawer and told you were the fire marshal, she said. You can resign. I told her I would. Then I didn't. The drawer had become a radio playing a station just below hearing. It made me lean in. You lean in long enough and you forget what standing upright felt like. I began to narrate even when I wasn't following protocol. I am walking past the study. I am choosing the kitchen. I am cutting an apple that is not a metaphor. It helped until it didn't. On the 8th night of these small performances of control, I found myself at the desk without remembering the walk. My fingers were around the key. The house was very quiet. It was either 3 in the morning or time had forgotten the number for itself. I am not opening the drawer, I said. I opened the drawer. Inside, the notebook was where I had left it. The box was where it had been. The envelope lay like a shed skin. Nothing had moved. Everything had. Under the notebook, which I lifted as if it had weight beyond paper, there was a second envelope I hadn't noticed. Thin, unlabeled. Inside, a single index card, written in my father's hand. If you have arrived at this card at 3 in the morning, you are not curious. You are lonely. Put the drawer to bed. Put yourself to bed. Call Salazar at 9. He will not be surprised. I laughed and the laugh broke. It sounded like a lock failing. At 9, I called. You waited longer than he did, Mr. Salazar said. He didn't ask how I was. People who work with locks learn not to ask doors how they feel. I can come by at noon. Come now, I said, and heard the way now snapped. Noon, he said, because he was older than my panic. Make tea. I sat on the floor until the kettle forgot to whistle and almost killed itself. He arrived at 12:07, Terrier wearing a bandana that made him look like a bandit who'd retired to a nice neighborhood. Mr. Salazar brought a canvas bag that had fixed more marriages in our cul-de-sac than any therapist. Hinge oil, graphite, strange little rods that understood tumblers, the patience of a man who believes most problems are repetitive. He stood in the study doorway and breathed in. It's louder, he said. You hear it too, I said, which was shameful and a relief. I hear you hearing it, he corrected. It's the same thing for our purposes. He put his palm flat on the desk, then on the drawer, as if blessing, as if testing the temperature of soup. He kept it longer than most men can keep a thing that cuts them, he said, admiring and sad. What is it? I asked like a child. What do we call it? Habits that grow claws, he said. Fear's grandson. Control's hungry dog. He shrugged. I do not speak Latin. Your father would have. I know locks. This one is spiritual. Those are the ones that rust worst. He took out his tools and didn't touch the key. He worked at the faceplate instead, as if the problem was not the lock, but the door that welcomed it. He unscrewed, he sanded, he hummed. As he worked, he told me a story I had not asked for about his own father, who had kept a drawer of letters from a woman who lived in a city he'd never visited. Letters he read on his birthday, like he visited the city in his mind. When Mr. Salazar was 15, he had opened that drawer and understood why his parents' marriage sounded like winter. I put the letters back, he said. I oiled the drawer so it would be quiet when he opened it at night. It was my first lock, the first time I fixed a thing that did not want to be fixed. He straightened. There, he said. He hadn't removed the lock. He had adjusted something around it. It will still open. But now it will open when you tell it to, not when it tells you to. I hadn't realized until he said it that this had been the weather of my days, a drawer that wanted things. How much? I asked. He put his hand out and patted my shoulder like a door you have to knock twice. Bring me the terrier when I can't carry him upstairs anymore, he said. That will pay me for this and the coffee. He packed his bag. At the door he hesitated. Your father brought me this desk the year your mother left, he said without turning. I kept it in my garage for 2 months. He said I would know when to give it back. I did. He didn't thank me. He looked like a man who had failed to drown a sound. When he left, the house did not exhale. Houses hold their breath longer than people can. I went into the kitchen, poured out the cold tea I had failed to drink, washed the cup to prove I could complete a cycle, then returned to the study and immediately failed to complete the next. I opened the drawer. It slid easily now, like a skater's first clean figure 8. It felt like cooperation. It felt like an invitation. The box lay in its cedar logic. The notebook's edges lifted slightly as if they had absorbed as much of me as they could and were eager for new wind. I reached for neither. I reached for the bottom, for the wood beneath the objects. If there was a false bottom to this story, I wanted to press it. There was no false bottom. There was nothing but wood, aged smooth by 1,000 decisions. I closed the drawer. I locked it. I put the key in my pocket. I left the room. I made it 2 steps. Then I went back. Some part of me wanted to prove I could do it twice. What I haven't told you is that there was a woman. There is always a woman in stories like this. If it makes her easier to imagine, you can call her Maya. That is the name my mouth has learned. We had been together in the way people agree to be together, when they're both good at careful. We attended each other's obligations. We solved each other's small emergencies. We ate the meals the other person liked. When my father got sick, she learned the names of his medications faster than I did. She made a chart the nurse said belonged in a magazine. When he died, she put a hand on my back like you steady a ladder and said, "For now, the errands will be your grief. Later, the grief will be your grief. I'll be here for both." Then a week after the funeral, she put her own grief on the table. Her mother's remission was a rumor, her brother's relapse a fact. And we fell out of step the way people do when holding different weights. She wanted a life with schedules and witness and chairs that matched. I wanted a room with a drawer that would turn into a sentence if I looked at it hard enough. I can't compete with a metaphor, she said, when we finally called it what it was. I don't want to be the human version of the drawer you can't stop opening. I told her she wasn't. She told me I was wrong. Now, months later, the drawer had become both a metaphor and not, and I was practicing being alone in a house that had only known people who mistook control for love. I began to make lists the way my grandfather had, because lists feel like help. Replace furnace filter. Request death certificates. Call bank about trust. Do not think about the last thing your father said without meaning to. I should have loved you more when it was cheap. When you are raised by a correction, it is difficult to recognize kindness that doesn't arrive as an improvement. I started correcting myself in small ways. The mug goes here, not there, because here is neater. The book returns to the shelf with its friends, not to the arm of the chair where it can fall. The grief is allowed between noon and 4. I caught myself and laughed. I forgave myself and didn't. At 3, still I woke. The drawer still waited. I told myself it was not a spell but a habit. I told myself habits unlearn themselves if you starve them gently. I told myself a lot of things. I opened. I would like to tell you that what happened next was supernatural. It would be a cleaner story. The drawer contained a demon. The demon learned my name. I survived by remembering I had one. People forgive you faster if you blame the dark. It was not a demon. It was worse. It was a pattern with documentation. On one of the later pages, year 7 or 8, my father had written, "The experiment is this. If I lock my tenderness in a drawer long enough, will it stop knocking? If I lock my fear in the same drawer, will it eat my tenderness before it eats me? If I remove the drawer, will I know what to do with my hands?" I put the notebook down and stared at my own hands like they were tools I'd found in the street. I took out one of the protocol cards and held it beside the notebook like a talisman. "Say the names of the living." I said them. They answered by existing out loud inside me. I breathed and heard it. The study grew very quiet. Then it became louder than the rest of the house, not with sound but with attention, the way a person's forehead feels when someone's gaze sits down there. I narrated. I am closing the notebook. I am standing. I am closing the drawer. I am locking it. I am leaving the room. I did not leave the room. Instead, I opened the box again. Beneath the protocol cards was a smaller notebook, one I had missed. Thin, brown paper, stapled binding. It looked like something a person keeps in a pocket to catch errant thoughts before they run into traffic. On the first page, 2 sentences, one in each hand. A good man is a closed system. T. No one loves a system. -D. I do not know if the D was Daniel or Dad. I do know that I read the sentence. No one loves a system, and felt a small heat in my throat that meant I had swallowed a match. I flipped to the middle. Today I did not open the drawer. I went outside and sat on the back step and listened to the trash trucks teach me about routine. I am learning the difference between ritual and prison. Dad. I felt both admiration and envy for the man who wrote that. I did not feel like him. I turned to the last page. There, no handwriting. A single object glued to the paper with a strip of cellophane tape that had gone the color of tea, a key, smaller than the drawer key, less polished. It looked like a key a child would use to lock a diary. I peeled back the ancient tape. It came away reluctantly, brittle, leaving a rectangle of tack behind. I held the small key in my palm, weighted against the larger one in my pocket. The desk had another lock I had never noticed. It lived on the side panel, just under the overhang, where a knee would be. I only discovered it because I dropped the small key, and it clinked against metal where wood should have answered. There was a second keyhole. Of course there was. I put the small key in. It turned the way good questions turn, quietly, with a feeling of permission, surprised at itself. The side panel, a piece of wood I had assumed was structural, loosened. It was a shallow cabinet, dark enough inside to smell like sleep. I reached my hand in, palm facing up. The way you offer a horse your skin. My fingers met paper, not a notebook. A stack of single pages folded in half. A ribbon around them, not twine. The ribbon was a faded red. I recognized it. My mother had used it to mark her place in library books, sliding it in like a tongue so she could read 2 at once without losing either. The ribbon must have come with her from someplace warmer. She had left the ribbon behind. I slid the packet out and set it on the desk. On the top page, my name in her hand. Eli, I didn't leave because of your father. I left because of me, and I am sorry you had to carry my leaving like a backpack full of rocks. Some people were born with a drawer in them and don't want to be. Some people were taught to be the key. I wasn't brave enough to be either. If you are reading this, your father did what he could and then did something he couldn't. He kept these for you because he thought you would one day want the version of me that could say I loved you and still go. I did love you. I still do. I am sorry I loved the room at the end of the hall with its own air more. If you open this at night, please stop. Read in the morning when loneliness looks like light through blinds and not a tunnel that wants your bones. Mom, there were 12 letters. The first written the week she left. The last written the year I graduated high school. postmarked from a town whose name sounded like a dare. Every letter described a woman trying to learn how to be a person without becoming a correction. Every letter failed and succeeded by turns. In one, she admitted to eating cereal for dinner for 3 months because the idea of a pan made her sad. In another, she described the sound the river made, where it bent around a rock that had refused to be moved when the city came. I read them all in a straight line, like a person eating the bread they'd hidden for later in one sitting because the dark was too close to the table. I did not notice when I began crying. I noticed when I stopped. I folded the letters back as neatly as I could and slid them into the hidden compartment, replacing the ribbon the way she would have. Placed, not tied. I could feel the story trying to reorganize itself around this new center. It was no longer a father with a drawer. It was a house where 3 people had used furniture like weather. I was not a hero taking a lock from a poltergeist. I was a man who had learned to narrate his own movements so he could interrupt the inheritance of a correction. I closed the side compartment. I closed the main drawer too, because this finally felt like a door I could allow to rest. I walked out to the back step and listened to a trash truck and wanted to clap. My phone buzzed. Maya, are you home? She wrote. Bring your stubbornness outside. I'm on the sidewalk with bad coffee. We can have an argument about control in front of the hydrangeas. I went to the front door. I opened it. I stepped outside. It was noon and the air had decided to be a person. We walked. The house watched us leave without slamming anything. Maya handed me a cardboard cup that smelled like middle managers. We went to the corner and back, then to the corner again because certain talks need laps. I told her about the letters. I did not tell her about the mornings. I told her about the second lock. I did not tell her about the key that had warmed itself against my thigh. I told her about my father's notebook. I told her about withhold tenderness to reduce its marketplace value. I said it 3 times as if saying it could make it less true. She listened the way good listeners do, with her eyes and her shins. She stopped walking when she wanted me to understand a sentence mattered. You were raised inside an experiment, she said finally. You learned to be a lab tech and a subject. That is not your fault. It is your responsibility. I can feel myself wanting to build better cages, I said, with softer walls and nicer locks. Of course you can, she said. You're your father's son. And your mother's. You learned that rooms can save you and rooms can starve you. You are trying to be architect and meteorologist at once. And locksmith, I said. And locksmith, she agreed. But Eli, the goal isn't to make the perfect lock. It's to learn that you are allowed to leave doors open and still be safe. We stopped in front of Mr. Salazar's house. The terrier watched us from the window with weary arrogance. The bandana said bandit in a way that made me like him more. I keep thinking if I read it all, if I name it all, it'll be harmless, I said. She shook her head. You keep thinking if you can understand your father's loneliness, yours will be reasonable. But loneliness doesn't negotiate. It clocks in and does overtime. I found a protocol card that told me to make tea, I said, and felt stupid for the sweetness. Make tea, she said simply, and then put the card away like it's a recipe you don't need every day. We didn't touch. We have always been good at holding space with our faces. Come inside? I asked when we reached my door. She looked at the house like she was about to talk to a person who gossips. I'll come in if we don't go into the study, she said. You can show me your kitchen. You can show me you have food that isn't dry. I realized I didn't know if I had bread. We went inside. The house didn't flinch. The living room remembered how to be a living room. The kitchen forgave me. There was bread. It was dry but available. We ate toast like monks. We laughed once the way laughter arrives through a window someone forgot to close. When she left, she kissed my cheek in a way that made me believe we are allowed to update contracts. Call me at 3, she said, if you wake. If you even think about waking. I promised. Sometimes you are allowed to. The house had been teaching me a language called late. At 3, it would remind me I was my father's son. I would go to the study in the same way I used to go to the bathroom as a child, compelled by a body whose rules I didn't write. The night after the hydrangeas, I slept. Not the whole way. Not easily. Sleep had become a visa I could only apply for in person. But I stretched the border. I woke at 2 and turned over. I woke at 2:30 and put my hand on the wall like a dock when the boat rocks. I woke at 3 and texted Maya a single dot. She replied with a frog emoji because she refuses to give me exactly what I ask for when I act like a machine. I woke at 4 and listened to the house be a house instead of a metaphor. A mouse did something unethical in the pantry. The fridge coughed like a smoker who'd quit. A siren far away said someone else's name. I slept. I didn't dream of the drawer. I dreamt of a river that had a bend in it so stubborn the water had learned politeness. In the morning, I went to the study at 10. I opened the drawer at 10:01. I did not narrate. I did not perform. I lifted the notebook as if it were an ordinary object. I placed it on the desk. I set my hand flat on the wood beside it and breathed in and out until breathing didn't feel like a decision. Then I did something my father did not write down. I took the notebook, the protocol cards, the small brown pad with the taped key scar, and the letters from my mother, and I put them in the cedar box. I did not tie the twine. I did not lock the box that wasn't lockable. I carried the box to the living room. I put it on the coffee table like a guest. I sat on the couch. I let the box be present in a room that wasn't a shrine. I read one of my mother's letters aloud, because sound changes the shape of ink. Eli dash dash. I keep thinking I'll call you when I become the kind of person who will be worth your forgiveness. It's a terrible timeline to insist on. Imagine if we all waited until we were perfect to be loved. What a quiet world. I am sitting on the bank of a river where a dog brings me sticks I didn't throw. What I'm saying is, there is loyalty in the world that doesn't require you to fix yourself first. I hope you find it. I hope you let it find you. Mom. I held the letter against my mouth for a moment because the body sometimes knows how to pray without religion. Then I put everything back in the box. Then I put the box back in the study, in the drawer. I locked it. I returned the key to my pocket. I left the room. The difference the leaving made was not in distance. It was in the absence of a chase. If we were telling the clean version, we would end here. Man learns he is allowed to be soft without being corrected. Drawer becomes ordinary. The house stops speaking in taps. But clean endings are corrections disguised. What happened is this. I got better at noticing when I was making a room into a rule. I caught myself telling the toaster that it was a metaphor for patience. I apologized to it and ate my toast. I caught myself arranging books by height so the shelf would look like sensible teeth. I made one book crooked on purpose and left the room without turning back. I caught myself drafting a text to Maya that read, like an apology plus a contract plus a pre-argument. I deleted it and wrote, hydrangeas again. I'll bring the expensive mediocre coffee. I caught myself waking at 3 and not needing to move, because the drawer was a piece of wood that lived where I lived. Sometimes I woke and laughed at the old hunger. Sometimes the old hunger laughed at me. We didn't feed each other as much. I caught myself in the afternoon, opening the drawer, and for the first time, putting something of mine in it. A photograph of the river bend Maya and I had walked to on a day when the air behaved. A note in my clumsy hand, not addressed to anyone but left like a leaf. This family corrected itself so hard it bruised. I am learning to make room without making prison. I am learning to be late to the temptation to control. I am letting the drawer be a drawer. If I forget, I will read this aloud. A week later, Mr. Salazar knocked with the terrier tucked under his arm and 3 steps he couldn't quite climb alone. He has decided to be carried, he said, embarrassed and fond. It is a new drawer. I took the dog. He allowed it like a prince tolerates a lesser prince. He smelled like dust and surrender. It's quieter, Mr. Salazar said, standing in my study doorway again, hands in his pockets so he wouldn't fix for the sake of fixing. You did it, or you started to. That is more than most men do. We did it, I said, and meant the living names. I meant my father, who failed loudly and then wrote about it. I meant my mother, who sent me letters I could put a glass of water on without damage. I meant the house, which had stopped being an accomplice. I meant Maya, who'd made me stand in front of hydrangeas until I understood I was allowed to be a person. He nodded like a man who knows a shared credit is the only kind worth having. We drank coffee at the kitchen table. We didn't talk about locks. We talked about fruit. He told me the exact day peaches forgive you for being alive. When he left, I went back to the study and sat in the chair not to perform something, but to see what a chair feels like when it is only a chair. I did not open the drawer. I put my hand on the desk and tried to want nothing from it. Then, because it is hard to leave a familiar room empty and still trust it exists, I took out a clean index card and wrote a protocol that was mine. Protocol for when I think the drawer is me. 1. Go outside. 2. Say 3 names of people who have seen you cry and stayed. 3. Drink water. 4. Touch something alive that does not need you. 5. Let the dark pass without checking its pockets. 6. If you can't sleep, write 1 sentence to the boy who promised and had no idea what he was promising. 7. Forgive him. 8. Forgive your father for believing control was a life raft and not noticing it was wood and therefore heavy. 9. Forgive yourself for liking the weight. 10. Go to bed. Leave the door open. Let the air have a say. I slid the card into the drawer, not to trap it, but to give it a home among the older orders. I locked the drawer. I left the room. I called Maya. At 3 that night, I woke, touched the wall, and felt the house say present the way a person answers at roll call when they didn't think they would make it. I didn't go to the study. I learned to be a person who leaves the study sometimes. There will be days I forget every paragraph I've written here. There will be mornings the key feels like a medal I haven't earned, and nights it feels like a coin I can pay the dark with. There will be a week in winter when the hydrangeas die so loud I think someone is knocking. There will be a phone call in which I tell someone younger than me that they aren't broken in any way that requires wood. There will be a photo on the mantle of a man whose hairline is mine and whose jaw never learned to unclench. And I will put my hand on the frame and say, we did what we could. On a future afternoon when the house is older and I am kinder to it, a child will stand in this study, perhaps mine, perhaps someone else's, and run their fingers along the edge of the desk the way the hand runs along the back of a pew. They will look at the drawer and feel it looking back. They will ask, I will kneel. I will look them in the eye. I will say, promises are for protecting people, not furniture. This drawer is a drawer. We can open it together when the sun is up. And if we do, they will find, on top of the notebooks, on top of the letters and the map that became a man, a single note in my hand, folded once, no envelope, because some things you don't hide. If you have opened this, I did not fail. You did not inherit a prison. You inherited a room where we learned to sit without fixing each other first. Leave the window open. Let the air have a say.